Good morning, everybody. Could I have a good morning? Come on, everyone. Do you all just want to stand up quickly, right? And do you want to just give me a quick round of applause? That's for Siri and for Arup for organising this event. And that's for our fantastic debaters for showing up to face you all. And if you're all here for the Young Water Professionals debate, then you're in the right place. You're going to hear from young or early careers professionals, what I like to think of the sort of digital part of the Stockholm World Water Week, and maybe a few more seasoned, slightly later careers individuals, what I might describe as more analog, so they might be making a contribution. And as you can see, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I've probably just crept into the second half. So what we're going to do today, let me set the scene. We're going to have a debate, and we're going to have a debate about water, which is why we're all in Stockholm. And we're going to have a debate with some fantastic individuals. The rationale for that debate, starting off, is let's just think about water. Let's think about the value that water provides for economic development, for society, for people, and for nature. Should any one of these trump the others? With water scarcity in some of the parts of the world, it's a challenge for the global north and the global south. This debate's going to explore how we allocate water, how we appraise, and how we prioritise water investment. To do this, we came up with a motion, and you can read it there, but this House believes that investment in water should be prioritised on its economic value and not its environmental or public social value. Well, that's a little bit of a challenge. I thought I'd get some whoops or someone would be booing or something like that. I'm going to chair it, and we're going to hear arguments for and against the motion from the participants. We're going to have an opening brief speech, and we'll have a closing summary from my able colleague Isabel later. We're going to have plenty of opportunity for audience questions and rebuttal, and this interactive debate is going to explain what we mean by the value of water, how we assess it, and how we make trade-offs between the beneficiaries. At the end of the session, the winning debating team will be crowned, but we haven't actually got a crown. But those who've managed to sway the most votes, who've managed to get you to walk from one side of the room to the other, to change the way you think about things. But the true winners, the absolute true winners, will be you, the audience. You'll have this opportunity, front seat, to experience this really vibrant and what many have said is the most exciting part of the entire Stockholm Water Week. So I'll introduce our speakers first, because I think that'll work quite well. We'll start with Tove Lexen. She's the Programme Officer in the International Policy Team at CIVI, and she works with global processes around Agenda 2030, the Water Action Decade 2018 to 28. So, Tove, can we have a quick round of applause? Next, and I hope I get this right, next is not Elisa anymore, because we've reorganised them. So Elisa, would you like to just stand up and then... So this is Elisa. This is Elisa Valancourt. She's the Youth Project Manager for the International Secretariat for Water, and she's Youth Advisor to the CEO of Global Centre on Adaptation. Fantastic. Next, Juanita. Thank you, Juanita. She's Programme Officer at CIVI with experience in a range of topics, access to water in rural dispersed communities to groundwater governance. Diego, I don't know if you need any introduction. He's, yes. He's lead water economist for Eastern and Southern Water, that's Africa at the World Bank in Pretoria. where he's responsible for analytical work on climate change, resilience and urban water security. And next we have Sophia. So this is Sophia De La Rosa Solano. She's worked for 8 years in water governance and climate adaptation. She's originally from Colombia, and she's currently working in the Netherlands as a junior advisor for the Valuing Water Initiative. She's Spanish coordinator for the Community of Women in Water and as a topic editor for the Global Water Forum. I'm amazed anyone's got the time to come here and give us their time today. And last, but by no means least, we have James Dalton. Dr. James Dalton is director of IUCN's Global Water Programme, having first joined IUCN in 2009 as the Water Management Advisor. So that's our whole team. Round of applause, please. Okay, so Tove's going to go first. Then she's going to speak for the motion. Then Elisa's going to speak against the motion. Juanita's going to speak for the motion. Sophia's going to speak against the motion. Diego's going to speak for the motion. And then James is going to speak against the motion. I've got to say that the people don't necessarily represent their own organisation's views. We've actually asked them to try and give some views that will really get a bit of dynamic to the debate, so we're quite excited about that. We're then going to have an opportunity for the presenters to very quickly respond to one another's arguments. We've done that before. We'll open the debate to the floor. It should be about 11:45, something like that, which gives you all an opportunity to think of your questions, come up with some questions. And then we'll just have some very concise final statements. We'll then have a vote at the end, and then we'll have a summary of the debate from Isabel, which makes my job a lot easier. But before we have the vote at the end, what we normally do is have a vote at the beginning. And you probably can't see it, but we've got digital technology in this room, and we'll be able to come up with the approximate percentage very quickly. So who is in support? Who believes that investment in water should be prioritised on its economic value and not its environmental or public social value? So who supports that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Which team are
Yeah. Louise, that's 9.3%. It's just come up on my digital 9.3%. So we'll see how we can build it up. The analog one, it's still crunching away down here. It's like gears and steam coming out. Yeah. And the pigeon will arrive soon, so we'll see how we get on. Okay, so I think we're going to start with Tove. Tove, you've got 5 minutes, so if you'd like to stand where you are.
Okay.
And then speak from there, if that's okay.
Sure.
Is everyone ready? Get scribbling, get listening. There's a reason we have 2 of these and 1 of these. Now's your chance to listen. Tove.
Hi all. Like it or not, we operate in a world and a system that are guided by economic incentives. We need to be frank and not fool ourselves with something that does not work. We can appreciate water from a social or environmental perspective, culturally, but if we are to attract the finances that we need for combating the water crisis, we need to be realistic and play the game the way it is played. Part of this reality is to understand the role and the nature of companies. On the role of private sector, there are 2 things to understand. First, we need their money. Whatever conference you go to, there's always a strong call for financing and a realization that the money from foreign aid is not enough. We need to tap into the economic resources of investors. Second, today companies are in charge of 10% of our water resources, and 60% of the water is used for agriculture, including industrialized food production managed by companies. In other words, up to 70% of our water is in the control of the private sector. So again, like it or not, we need to work with companies. And for this, we need to understand how they operate, their nature. Companies need to make profit. and investors need to make their shareholders happy by having an upside return. It is as simple as that. But what makes an investment profitable or what generates growth in a company is not simple. Living in a world with climate change, biodiversity in severe danger, and inefficient use of water resources, all sectors will be affected by adverse environmental effects. The risks of not acting at our best to prevent these negative environmental happenings are dire economic costs. Thus, the degradation of nature poses a threat to most businesses, and investing in water or whatever companies is needed from a purely economic perspective. Therefore, we need the private sector and other actors to understand the economic value of water and how this value is deeply relevant for their work. We therefore need to generate a common understanding of water's economic value, as well as regulatory and follow-up mechanisms for the usage of water if we want to carefully manage our water resources. We need clear price mechanisms and regulations. An informed market that is guided by current and future risks will provide companies with better guidelines and thus lead to better behavior than confusing ourselves with models based on social or environmental values that nobody understands how to operationalize. We would just lose time. So this is the situation we are in and the actors operating in it. We need to speak the language of the private sector and make them understand why being sustainable also is profitable. What decides profit is not as simple as it used to be, but financial growth will always be a part of it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So play the game. It's as simple as that. Purely economic value. Is everyone swayed? We'll see. Let's see how the pendulum swings. So next we've got opposing the motion, Elisa.
So over 2 billion people live in countries experiencing water stress, and over 2.2 billion people still don't have access to clean drinking water. If one thing is for certain, the current system is not working. We have a climate and nature emergency. Water has an enormous and complex value for our households, food, culture, health, education, economics, and the integrity of our natural environment. According to the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace, published in 2017, water is a fundamental condition of human survival and dignity. And it is the basis of the resilience of societies and of the natural environment. Time and time again, we have seen the negative results of using only economic value to drive decision-making. And the global water crisis is yet another example of this. Studies have shown that the values people hold about water are to a large extent intangible, that it is value that cannot be seen, touched, or directly measured. My main point, my main argument for today is this. Prioritizing economic growth has come at the expense of the environment and our social well-being, especially of the most vulnerable and marginalized communities. Market prices are failing to reflect the full opportunity cost of water because negative externalities are not well incorporated into the market. The environment has important values that should not be constrained or defined by monetary-based approaches. Also, price-based valuation techniques give greater voice to richer people. Individual or groups from indigenous communities, women, youth groups are not often included in relevant decision-making processes. How about we start looking at who are those who are deciding how we choose to value our water as a society? Aren't these people benefiting from the status quo? The high-level panel on water published in 2017 calls for a transition to include all relevant stakeholders, to take into account the multiple and diverse values of water, to different groups and interests in all decisions affecting water. Let's look at a concrete example. Water is a human right. Large subsidies for wash service provisions are justifiable from an economic as well as a social and moral standpoint. It is vital that access is ensured for all, and subsidies are an important means for achieving this goal. That said, 56% of subsidies in the wash sector benefit the wealthiest quintile of the population, while only 6% goes to the poorest quintile. If we would further value the environmental and social benefits of water in the decision-making processes related to investments in water, by taking the time to speak with the people truly affected by this situation, maybe we can reverse these statistics. Concentrating primarily on the economic value has led to inequalities in access to water resources and water-related services, but also to inefficient and unsustainable use and degradation of water supplies themselves, affecting the fulfillment of nearly all the SDGs, as well as basic human rights. The value of water is infinite, since life does not exist without it, and there is no replacement for water. We are spending trillions to look for water on Moon and on Mars, yet it is often taken for granted here on Earth. So I will thus conclude by finishing with a simple statement. It is time that you start valuing water as much as you value your own life. Thank you.
Wow, it's getting really powerful, and we're moving into more stats. We're hearing UN declarations. Do we want more inequality? Do we want more inefficiency? And we've even included the Moon and Mars. I'm not sure if we restricted it to this planet, but we've got the Moon and Mars. Have you changed your views yet? We'll see. Next, we're going to have Juanita, and she's going to speak for the motion. Juanita.
Yeah, for the motion. So, the water crisis is a global crisis that includes financial markets, the economy, and it's imperative to mobilize capital, and this is only going to happen if the benefits are measured, evaluated, and maximized. Prioritizing the economic value of water can first promote investment in the water sector. Second, the preservation of ecosystems. Third, transparency and accountability in the corporate water use. And fourth, promote efficiency in the water use and regulation. So first, promote investment in the water sector. Water is one of the most underfinanced sectors by governments. Very few countries have a Ministry of Water, let alone how much of their national budget is actually being allocated to these institutions and to protect the resources. It is even more worrying how the investment for the provision of wash services is decreasing. Why are these sectors so underfinanced? We need to think of our end goal to attract more funding into the sector, strengthen water utilities and those responsible of the service provision, and therefore contributing to closing the gap of service delivery. We will not be able to ensure 100% coverage of service provision, guaranteeing the human right to water and sanitation without investments from the private sector. For this, we must prioritize an economic approach to how water is being evaluated, developing a strong and attractive business case. Second, payment for the ecosystem services. We must acknowledge how water interconnects everything. Although we cannot put a value on all the ways that natural resources enrich our life, there are many tangible benefits to living in a world with strong and healthy ecosystems. We have a stronger economy, diverse food products, and advancement in medical research as a result of healthy ecosystems. Water is creating economic value, and without these interactions and activities wouldn't be possible. Ecosystems themselves couldn't be sustained without the water cycle. These processes allow the earth to sustain basic forms of life, let alone how ecosystems and people. Water creates tangible economic value that needs to be quantified, measured, and paid for. Having water in sufficient quantity and quality entails a cost, and it is not free, and such cost needs to be paid. I am not only referring to the provision of tap water or water for hydroelectric energy, but also for the maintenance of nature and ecosystems, which make possible the development of being for spiritual and recreational practices. Those living in these areas are preserving the environment and have a huge responsibility that should be valued by society. Third, corporate water disclosure. We need to promote transparency and accountability regarding how much water is being used and how much water is being polluted by who. Prioritizing an economic value of water can contribute to track the water footprint, decreasing negative externalities such as pollution based on the principle that polluter pace, regulating the water use of a common resource, and preventing unfaithful practices such as greenwashing and water hoarding. We need to promote corporate water stewardship, and the only way is to give an economic value that will benefit us all, because the resource itself will be preserved. Fourth, financial water markets. This is our future, and we want it or not, the world is shifting towards it. Water is being a limited and precious resource. We'll create a market that promotes a new globalized framework to regulate the use of water, discharge of wastewater, and value. States are outdated. Institutions that don't have the capacity or scope to regulate unseen flows of water, such as virtual water. States do not have enough capacity to regulate and control the biggest water users, but a globalized market does. So, to conclude, we need to be more pragmatic. Yes, water has an intrinsic value, but it's also a limited resource. Prioritizing an economic approach to how we value water, we can regulate it for its use and to protect it.
Well, that's easy. We just have to be pragmatic and monetize everything. I mean, we've got corporate water disclosure. We've been discussing the polluter pays principle, the issues around greenwashing and virtual water. So the pendulum isn't just moving in one direction, it's moving in a number of directions. I expected by now that we'd start to be getting a little bit more friction. Everyone's being awfully polite, but based on previous ones, I think that this is about to change. So to oppose the motion, our second opposing speaker, and that's Sofia de la Rosa Solano.
Well, dear fellow debaters and audience, I will start some friction and I will ask the people for the motion why you haven't considered the latest discussion on where do we need to prioritize water investment. I'm talking specifically to about the high-level panel water that Elisa has already mentioned, and that aims to tackle the imminent collapse of the water systems that support and connect all water processes, including economic development. Back in 2016, the UN and the World Bank convened a high-level panel for water. This panel engaged in a 2-year-long consultation process. They gathered world leaders, water experts, and other key stakeholders. Their main finding after all this process was the same one that we have been hearing all over this World Water Week, and the same one that we are bringing next year to the New York World Water Conference. And it's very simple. We need to better value water, including all of its non-economic values. However, this conclusion was not easy, was not biased. It was very complex to get to there. It was an inclusive process, research and database, and it took 2 years. So it's not like they came for it for free or just based on simple environmental, pro-societal, pro-environmental bias. This high-level panel also elaborated a roadmap on how to effectively value water, and they created 5 value water principles. The first one is recognize and embrace water multiple values, not just the economic one. The report specifically says, valuing water requires recognizing the full range of direct and indirect benefits and risks associated with water, which may be cultural, spiritual, emotional, economic, environmental, or social. In the current situation, and agreeing with all the debaters before me at this point, as of 2022, it's clear that most investments in water currently are prioritizing its economic value, and that needs to change. However, if we look back in history, this hasn't always been the case. We have not always prioritized the economic value of water when thinking of water investments. When researching about this, what I found is that the prioritization of the economic value of water in history coincides with the rapid acceleration of the water crisis. We can see that prioritizing the economic value of water creates and is at the root of the current water crisis. Mainly, this happened with processes like the technification of water access that happened in European cities after the cholera outbreaks of the 19th century, the technification that occurred during the World Wars, and the incrementing acceleration of the Green Revolution. These ways of investing and the consequences that it has affects all economic processes. So we're not talking about only that it will create damage for the environment or the people, it creates damage to the economy itself. One example of this, the water drought in France has impeded the safe production of nuclear energy and the cooling down of data centers. On the other side of the coin, in Pakistan, we're having impeding grain production because of the floods, and we're destroying complete livelihoods because of this water crisis. So based on my arguments, I will respond to the motion by saying that water multiple values are intrinsically linked. And if we are to continue to prioritize water investments on its economic value, the natural systems underpinning our society will collapse, because water is a common thread that makes all environmental and social processes possible, including the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. So do you want to see the collapse of natural systems? Is that the idea? Did the UN have all the answers? Is it already been done? Are things in process already, or do we still have work to go? We have a route map, we have principles, we brought in spiritual value, emotional value, we haven't heard about that so far. Nuclear energy's now got onto the stage, data centers are onto the stage. You must be really confused at the moment. And probably you need to just balance and get you into the right space. Maybe you need our next speaker. Our next speaker, who's speaking for the motion, is Diego Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, let the fun begin. I'm going to start by quoting a very famous American president that said, "This is fake news," what our opponents are saying. Let's start a bit by some broader issues. We have never been as prosperous in the earth as we are today. Higher incomes, less poverty rates. You see the places like India or China with hundreds of millions of people getting out of poverty. We live longer, twice as longer as 100 years ago. We have better health, less child mortality, and so on. Why is that happening? It's because we're basing our decisions on economic efficiency. All of our countries, all of these sectors, including water, use basic economic principles to prioritize investments. So this is not about the weakness of economic efficiency. This is about weak governance. So it has nothing to do with how we value the resource. We started using tools such as cost-benefit analysis in the 1700s. In 1950, they became extremely popular and are used all over the world to prioritize investments. We are using, since the 1960s, a lot of valuation techniques to include in our analysis the opportunity cost of the resource. We value the resource in many different aspects. We have a cost-benefit framework that allows us to incorporate the opportunity cost of the resource and to reallocate in a way that we are achieving the welfare of the nation and its people. We value the resource by how each individual values that resource, the person. We are here concerned, at the end of the day, not about the water, but what the water brings to the population. And that's how we value the resource. So it's not an issue of economics is not working. It's an issue that economic is a tool for the decision maker to make that decision. And decisions are made on the basis, many times, not on economic efficiency. And that's a failure. So it's not the economics that is a failure. It's how that economics is used by others. So it has nothing to do with valuation. So what I wanted to finish by saying is that in reality, the water crisis is a water governance crisis. Thank you.
fake news. Is it all fake news then? That's really got us going. It's not about economics at all. It's about governance. That's what it's about. And we're really thinking about the welfare of nations, and we're thinking about ourselves as a species. So interesting. I'm not sure I think my vote might be moving, but we still have an opportunity just to...
James, you have a chance to leave now if you want.
Yes. James, quivering wreck, but now ready to take up the challenge. So, James Dalton, as a speaker opposing the motion, you've got the mic.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, fellow panelists. I'll be brief because I actually think answering this is quite brief. It's not complicated. We don't need to complicate it with the stats or the numbers. We need to think a little bit more about ourselves as people, ourselves in our communities and our society, and what water resources means to us. Our connection to nature is not new. It's our survival system. Our drinking water is clean and flowing because of ecosystems. They provide that service for us. They capture, store, convey, clean those water resources that we desperately rely upon. Understanding nature in economic terms, while not perfect, allows us to put everything into the same comparison chart, the same unit of comparison. As nature and the economy are often competing, by making a more level playing field, we can then make more rational, measured, accurate decisions. And we can bridge the gap by placing the two on the same table and understand how one can benefit the other and vice versa. The combined value of nature is estimated at over 100 trillion a year. That's 5-year-old data, and that doesn't take into account the value of the carbon that our natural ecosystems store. In particular, our freshwater ecosystems such as wetlands and peatlands, the most efficient carbon stores on the planet. At the time of that statistic, 100 trillion, the top 50 most profitable companies in the world made 10 trillion. Ecosystems and freshwater systems are off the scale in their value that we do not fully understand yet. Because we don't understand it, we don't value it, and we make decisions, therefore, that have long-term negative impacts on our futures. Valuing nature in a way that can speak to decision makers will and is helping direct action and resources into our natural systems. Look at forests, for example, and carbon. But much more needs to be done. Far, far more needs to be done for freshwater systems. Nature can, should be, and is, in some cases, included in the cost-benefit discussion. We are already there in this debate right now globally, but we need to accelerate putting freshwater systems in the level playing field with the traditional approach to water resource management. What needs to be better valued are the long-term negative impacts happening and likely to happen on our freshwater ecosystems, to adjust the cost-benefit system that takes into account the negative effects. If there is one thing that countries and companies constantly ask me nowadays, and it's happened this week here, is how can we protect the resources that we need to survive? How can we restore them? How can we improve them? And how can we protect water, land, and biodiversity at the same time? It's no longer a CSR conversation. It's no longer an ESG conversation. It's a business survival need, and it's the opportunity for them to invest in the natural systems that they rely upon. That is the economy. If there's one thing that I'll take away from this Water Week, it's the horrendous stories of groundwater pollution that we heard about on Sunday afternoon in a session with stories from groundwater studies around the world. Global groundwater extraction and pollution is a slow onset disaster that we do not fully understand yet. And we looked at this from a health perspective. Livestock deformities, human birth defects, cancer rates higher than other parts of the countries, toxic soil, millions and millions required in cleanup operations, house price devaluation, closed communities, business closure, and people having to move counties across countries, driving migration effectively. Because we only looked at the extraction value of groundwater, and we didn't value it properly, and we didn't value the ability of that ecosystem to absorb and clean itself from disastrously toxic nutrients. We didn't value the service, we didn't understand the damage we were causing, and we're now paying for it, for the cost of cleaning that up for the next 30 to 50 years. Integrating the value of ecosystems and freshwater services into our economic rationale will help drive investment into protecting the services that we rely upon for our entire survival and our future carbon budget of the planet. Thank you.
I saw a few nods there. I didn't see many heads shaking, but so we don't need stats, but we valued the planet at $100 trillion. You know, we don't value what we don't understand. That's an interesting concept. And thinking about the introduction of business survival when we don't take full account of water, land and biodiversity. And we've now got this introduction of migration, so an awful lot to consider. What I'm now going to do, using my privilege, is allow the two teams to just confer with each other for 1 minute, and then I'd like a spokesperson from each to come back to challenge the issues of the other party. So could you three just come together and confer here? You three confer here. I want you all to start thinking about the sort of questions you're going to ask when you get the opportunity in a moment. The time's already started. We have 30 seconds. Maybe on your tables you could have a chat with each other and just exchange what it is that you think is one side of the debate and one side of the other, because we're going to come back. Okay then.
He just said that. He's giving that.
Have you decided on your spokesperson?
Yes.
I think so.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Have you decided on your spokesperson?
Yes.
Right, so given I think that we had in the order of things, we had the speaking for the motion first. We're going to have the representative who's going to speak against the motion to just share your observations.
First the people against?
When we're ready.
Okay.
Yes, so who's going to speak against the motion? Okay. So it's going to be Sofia de la Rosa Solano.
Yeah. Well, we heard from the team pro the motion that we are living in quite the ideal world where we're having wealth, we're having health, we're living longer. And I wonder where in Disneyland they see that, because that is not the reality. If you walk anywhere in the global south, you will see higher rates of inequality and the 1% getting wealthier. Whereas we have been now for decades fighting this system, this economic system and this economic way of valuing not only water, but also nature. They kept talking about how regulating through the market, through the economic value, is an effective way to achieve governance. Whereas having this economic approach to water valuing has excluded at least 99% of people from accessing this wealth and this richness that the the planet has to offer. So overall, I would say that first, we are not in that situation where economic and market-based regulations are creating wealth and wellness for the majority of the people. Second, that all these arguments have been fought for decades, and what we find over and over again is that we need to go beyond that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. What do you think of that then?
Misinterpreting where we said everything in the Scotia Bank.
So it's about inequality. It's about fighting the economic system. It's about exclusion. Is that what you're all about?
Nonsense.
Let's hear that rebuttal. Let's see. What are your views? What are your views about what you've heard from our team who've been opposing the motion?
Okay, so you just said that we cannot value what we don't understand and what we don't measure. And we already have tools in place, such as subsidies. These tools are efficient if we develop them right. So the problem is not about the tools or the economic system, it's how we are framing it and how we're using these tools. We need to develop them to make them more efficient. But if we continue in this conversation of whether we use them or not, then we're not going to correctly develop. We're just wasting our time in these kind of things. We know that an economic valuation is the right thing to do.
Yeah. You see, we're wasting our time. We're wasting our time and we've already got tools. It's an interesting thing this week. We've heard a lot about tools at Stockholm, and every year we do. I have a little saying. Tools are like toothbrushes. Everybody's got one and nobody wants to use anybody else's. It might be worth you remembering that. What we're going to do a little earlier so that we get a bit more opportunity for you to engage and start challenging the speakers is I'd like you to put your hand up. To get Louise's steps up, she's going to be our roving mic. And could you please say your name, your organisation, and then could you direct either your comment about what you've heard or a viewpoint to either the supporting the motion or against the motion team. Okay? Who's going to go for this lady in the middle? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Elunga from C40 Studies, and just before I make this comment, I'd like to say that this does not represent C40's views, nor my personal views. I just like playing devil's advocate in these debate situations, so I'm actually with the for side at the moment, just to throw a spanner in the works. So my question is actually to the against team. And I feel as though a lot of the conversation and a lot of your debate has been around market value versus economic value. And the economic value is very much around what people are willing to pay. So we are all willing to pay as much as necessary for water. If imagine a world where water, like money as a monetary value, doesn't exist, you would imagine that you would trade your clothes for a bottle of water. You would trade your garden or a natural space for a bottle of water. That is not to say that that is what the economy would price that water at. So I think we just need to make that distinction. That wasn't maybe clear. If you can clarify it in your rebuttal around the economic value versus the market value, that would be great.
Okay, so you've got that. Can you clarify that as a team, and who's gonna come back on behalf of you to answer that one? I just want to make it clear that the C40 view that was expressed there isn't actually a C40 view, it's an individual view. It's like product placement, I'm just bigging up the C40 there for you.
There is no possible economic value of water. That would be my answer.
Okay.
But James, you say... But I just...
Okay. Maybe they disagree. Maybe they might not have any answers here. Maybe you're starting to swing your votes over that side. They might be the camp. Let's see.
All of our arguments are based in one simple statement: is we cannot have the economic value of water. We could have the market-based one. We cannot have the economic one because there is not amount of clothes I can exchange for what water is bringing me. Therefore, it's the tools that we have in place to achieve that market-based value are inefficient and insufficient, will not effectively regulate water governance. Therefore, making the distinction is valuable, to make the point that no tool from the market-based assignment of value will match the economic one that we're getting from water. That's how I would reply.
Thanks very much. Well answered. Very good. Our next, we've got a question over here. Anybody else who wants to question, can you put your hand up, please? Okay, we'll go here, there, and there. Okay.
So I'm Karin Lexén. I come from the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation. It's been interesting to listen to this debate, and I well understand the blah, blah, blah about using tools and et cetera, but my question is, economics can never be an end in itself. Is it not always a tool? Is it not always a mirror of something else? So isn't the economic value always an interpretation of something else? So my question is, can it really be an economic value in itself, or isn't it always based on or building on the value of other things like environmental or social values? So is an economic value really an end in itself?
So maybe we should put that for the team proposing the motion. Is it an end in itself? How do you make decisions if it's just about economic value when we've got the environment as well, hey?
So there's an issue at dinner.
That's
why I exposed it.
Tove.
Of course, an economic value is how we appreciate something, but that is how our system works. That is how we operate. We see something with an economic value because that is the way we understand each other. So it might be based on different things, but that is our common understanding, and that's how we can move forward. There can be other bases for this, but this is how we get together and understand each other and how we can operate together. So interesting thought, but doesn't really add anything to this discussion.
So we might have an imperfect system, but that's the system we've got. So that's the system we use. So could you put your hands back up before, because I think there's this lady in the corner, and then there's, I think there were, and then there's one in the middle. Yes, okay? Oh,
yes.
Panchali, and then one at the back, and then one over here. Thank you.
I'm Panchali working with CV. I wanted to raise this to the team against a motion of linking it with more on sustainability when we are looking into interventions that you need to make it sustainable. For example, at the community level, if there is no incentive related to it, communities are not interested to really take part in sustainability of any water intervention programs or water infrastructure maintenance, operation. And this is, I think, very core when we talk about the sustainability of any interventions development organizations, government really need to push. And a lot of these programs associated with microfinancing, with groups of, having some incentives so they can work together for the sustainability. And I think it's very crucial when we are talking about achieving those global agendas at the global level. Yeah, thank you.
So I agree. So was that a question or was that a comment? Just so I'm clear.
Having a sustainability of programs to meet those communities and environmental,
Thanks. Thank you, Panchali. So that's about, how do we make sustainable decisions or take account of sustainability in our decisions?
Yeah, I think that the answer to that lies in how we're building these interventions. That's kind of the point that I was trying to make as well, is that who are making these decisions, who are creating these programs. If it is the community that's making their own decisions, then they don't necessarily need incentives coming from the outside. If it's from the inside in that we're building the solutions, including the cultural, the social, the environmental values that we associate to water, then that's how we make it sustainable. Because they're always going to be involved in, the sustainability is always going to be important to them because it's their lives, it's their everyday lives. They always need to have access to water. So if you're really reversing the decision-making processes and including the communities that are most affected by these projects, initiatives in the decision-making process, for me, that's how we make it sustainable.
Oh, it's getting passionate. Oh, and you've got some applause. So the lady at the back, can you just tell us who you are and your question or
Mark,
comment?
just after the next question, we've got some online questions as well.
Super. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Edith Bijlsma. I work for the Value in Water Initiative for the Dutch government. My question is to you. I just wanted to take a step back, because now we are talking about the differences between economic values, environmental and social values. But would you think that within the investor sector, within the corporates, do you think overall water is valued enough? And if so, or how could we value water better within your sectors or within the investments that are made?
Okay, so that's going to go to our team proposing the motion.
No, of course, water is not being valued enough. That's the problem. That's why we need to develop this approach even better instead of wasting our time with these kind of debates. Like, of course, economic value should be prioritized. That's exactly the problem. We need to stop this kind of debates and develop more tools and a better approach to value water from an economic perspective that will make it way more efficient and maximize the utility.
My follow-up question would be, how would you propose to do that?
So just to keep this a little bit lively, we'll just let James join the discussion from this side. He maybe has got a perspective.
I think I keep reading this because I'm just struggling to remember which side I'm on. I think the question about integrating value for investors and for corporates, their main concern is the viability of their investment. And that means looking at, do they have access to water? Are they contributing to the basin in a way that is sustainable to continue access to that water? The reason that they get nervous is, will they have the license to operate a business in the future when those basins go dry? We're seeing it now across Europe, when the forests burn, when the landscape is bone dry, when villages are cut off from water supply and you can't access it anymore. The public health and the public good will always win over, because that's what governments have to prioritize. What they won't prioritize, and it's very controversial, are things like Coca-Cola and beer, because we don't need those to survive. We need water. It's the raw water that runs our economy and runs our businesses. So integrating that understanding into the value of a business to be able to use the resources to actually sustain those ecosystems is critical. So the opposing team are correct on some of the points when it means that we have to get better at disclosure, better questions, better transparency on these issues.
Maybe the opposing team is starting to sway the argument. Who knows? I just want to make it clear, we meant large soft drinks manufacturer with no specific trademark. So now,
I've got two online.
I'm aware we've got this question over here, so we're going to go online for some questions. Yeah. Could you be the voice, please?
I will be the voice of Georgette. I'm channeling in my inner Georgette here. This is a question for the opposition team. Which sources of finance will prioritizing water for its environmental or public value mobilize?
Which sources will it, by prioritising, will it mobilise?
Sorry, which sources will prioritize?
Which sources will prioritizing water for its environmental and public value mobilize?
Any source that will want to stay, will like to have any revenue or income in the next 50 years. All businesses who are not engaging with the non-economic value of water will perish. We are seeing that. We have evidence-based data that shows that if you do not make these investments now, that if you appreciate how you're earning your income now, that if you want to make resilience and resourceful investment, you need to invest in these nature-based solutions, community-focused infrastructure, environmental friendly processes. If not, simply, if you are not investing in this, Therefore, you will not survive. So I would say anyone, all the sources, all the economic resources need to be doing this now. They needed to be doing it 10 years ago, but now. That's how I would say.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that was carrot or stick, given that they're not going to have a license to operate and the businesses will perish. But I like the sort of dialogue.
Can I add to that?
And James is going to add to that, so we've got a little bit of a 1-2.
In terms of being able to mobilize finance, the list is long. Fast-growing businesses will need to be able to invest in this, in protection of social and environmental goods themselves. There is a plethora of new foundations being set up from businesses because they see the fact that they need to start looking at this and investing in watersheds where they have operations. Multilateral finance moving into this space, protecting wetlands and peatlands and mangroves and seagrass, other important carbon-based systems which are critical for freshwater management and freshwater services. People, crowdsourcing, is a key way. Startups use this to access financing, to mobilize investment. People, we will all be paying for this because we will have to support the process. And because we also, in the Northern Hemisphere, wealthier countries should be paying for that. We need to start setting some examples, leading on this topic. Green bonds, social impact bonds, all of these are mechanisms that will be able to start channeling finance into freshwater systems.
Okay, we're now going to take the question in the middle again. Could you tell us your name, please, your organisation, and then your question? Thank you.
Thank you. I am Sandile Mkhize from Makhalis Water Utility in South Africa. I am for the motion. I'll start by making a comment and then a question. My understanding is that what is not valued will never be respected or protected. So without proper applying of economic value of water and valuing the water, you are not going to get in private sector to invest. And such investment does not only benefit the investors, but it end up benefiting the economies, the communities, and also the environment. How then would you secure investment in the areas where there is no economic value or return for the investors? Thank you.
Yes. So we're going to take that on. We're going to take that on the against the motion first. So, do you want to take that one? Yes. Do you want to stand up? Thanks. Then everyone can.
I think that what we're saying is that for water to be valued the way that it should be, we need to take into consideration the environmental, cultural, and social value that it is worth. Looking only at the economic value we're undervaluing water right now. It doesn't encompass everything that it should in the if we look at the strictly investment in the economic value of water. So that's maybe James, you want to add?
Thank you. Before you do add to that, anything from the motion team, or is that just lending some?
He's our friend.
Shoulder to the. Did you place him in the? No. James.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd like to. But James, could we try and keep keep everything quite concise to all the panel, please, when we get responses? Thank you.
I'm quite surprised to hear that from my learned friend from South Africa and from a utility, given the situation Cape Town was in day zero in 2022 and was at crisis point, that there was no understanding, that there's no understanding of the broader natural system that requires investment from a water perspective. South Africa actually is pretty good at this in terms of removing invasive species and protecting its systems, but more can be done. So I find that quite surprising, but the point you were saying was about the investment in that and who pays for it. There are different mechanisms. Different investors want different outcomes from their investment. You have to blend what that looks like, because some people will lend and invest from different rates, and they will want different returns. Social, they won't necessarily want a financial return. They will have different purposes for doing it. So that is definitely possible. we're not just looking at hardcore investment in infrastructure here, we're looking at the possibilities of how entire systems could be invested in. Thank you.
Right, so we're going to take our next questions. I just want the teams to be thinking, because you're going to be each able to give your final statements in a while, so we take another 10 minutes of questions then. So just so that that's mulling through, just to confuse you so that when you get the questions you're a bit more bamboozled than you already are. So
Mark, I've got one online actually for the proposition. Give Diego some challenge.
Yeah, so I was just going to say we'll take the online question over here, and then the question that the lady at the back's very politely waited for. Thank you.
So I've got a question from Cecile. How can we prioritise based on economic value of water while still challenging our capitalist system? Can we play the private sector's game without encouraging it?
I think that's for the the motion. Can we?
You want to go?
No, you can.
Yeah.
Can you stand up and then
Oh, sorry.
It projects really well for the room.
I missed the last part though of the question.
The last part, Diego, was can we play the private sector's game without encouraging it?
Okay. And the first one was on the valuation.
It was how can we prioritise based on economic value while still challenging our capitalist system?
I think that's what we do, right? In cost benefit today, we are trying to capture, to maximize consumer surplus, which is an individual valuation mechanism, no? In that valuation, you're trying to capture a lot of the social and environmental dimensions, depending on the program that you have. And we finance 85% of water is public resources, right? So in a sense, a lot of these investments have, characteristics of private firms in many occasions, but they are financed by the public sector. So we are already having that role in most of the countries. Private sector participation, for example, where I am now in South Africa, is 2% of the investments in water. So we are valuing the resource with these tools as a public entity and public governments, and basically we are running the same systems that the private sector would be running, right? So the claim is we need additional resources, and that's when the private sector comes in. But the premise and the valuation systems are basically the same, right? Thanks.
Thanks, Diego.
I think we're going to go over to this lady over on the right-hand side. And has anybody, could you just show me, has anybody else got a question, one that's burning, or even a comment that could help just contribute to what we're discussing? Right.
Okay.
Yes, we might come back there. Okay.
Great. Hi, Jenna Gami from Forest Trends. I have a question for the group that's for the motion. What I'm hearing is that you all believe we should be able to capture all of these values in cost-benefit assessments and therefore make optimal decisions. But what about when cost-benefit analysis is actually, by its very nature, not able to deliver what we want? So in a lot of ways, efficiency, for example, is in tension with resilience. When we need redundancy, we need multiple ways to be able to adapt and be flexible in the future. How do we bring that into our systems? And also, in a similar way, what about when a cost-benefit analysis will tell us that it's not worth connecting certain communities to clean water and sanitation? Do you not believe in achieving SDG 6?
Oh, there's a challenge there. It sounded to me like she's almost in your corner. She's probably swaying. Here's your opportunity. What do you think?
Well, I think sanitation. It was clear from the corona pandemic that if we don't have proper sanitation, it also costs societies a lot of money. So you can also evaluate it in an economic perspective, even those kind of services or goods for human beings from a social perspective. Everything can be translated into economic costs. When it comes to resilience, it depends on which perspective you have. Well, if you have a short-sighted perspective on economic benefit, it's not resilient. But that is not inherent of having an economic system or valuing water from an economic perspective. If we see the long-term perspective, it's also beneficial, profitable to be resilient in how we use our natural resources and water.
And is there any comment from this side of the table? No. Okay, that's very good. Right, any hands? We'll have a comment. The mic's coming. We're multitasking here. We've got hybrid. It's all over. Right.
Once again, not my personal views or C40s, but I think
they sound like them. No.
Once again, I'd like to make the comment for the team that's against. I think Isabel, is that your name? I think she made the point of we don't want it to be solely economic. The statement says should be prioritized on its economic value. So it's not to necessarily say that the environmental and public and social elements won't be considered. It's just to say that economic value will be first. So maybe that sways your argument a little bit. And then on the point on Cape Town, ultimately, I'm from Cape Town. One of the things that swayed the citizens was increased tariffs, which is very much associated with an economic value. So how do you make that argument?
Okay. I'm not going to personally comment, whilst I might. I'll give the opportunity for my learned friend here, who we've started opening the Cape Town situation, so.
So what I'm saying is that increased tariffs, so you're changing, you're understanding the value through changing the price in order to get income to be able to invest in the system, right? And people have to pay that price. And so that's essentially what's happened. So further investment in upstream watershed management and increased infrastructure. So somebody's paying for the fact that the system wasn't resilient in the first place and didn't deliver in a certain way, partly due to climate impacts as well, right? The weather happens. So I'm not disagreeing with your point, absolutely. What you're saying is that due to the fact that the tariff increased, effectively that's integrating social value into that. Because people need water. Their social needs are for access to water resources. So by increasing the tariff, people are getting that benefit back. So I think that's right. But the point about efficiency, I don't know if you said it earlier on, is integrated water resource management, when it was coined in the last UN Water Conference in 1977, which I wasn't at, just to be clear, built IWRM around three things, 3 E's. Economic return, as one of the pillars, equity, and environmental function. That is the 3 E's of integrated water resource management. I think we can all agree that equity and environmental function are certainly degraded in applying that philosophy. And that's where we've got to. That's why the new agenda is changing what IWRM is. That's where the attention needs to be. Thanks.
Oh, we're getting philosophical.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I think your question also relates to your previous comment, because we need to understand what we're talking about when we say we need to prioritize the economic value. The economic value is the one that we have given water based on what you said before, the market-based value. So what we are attaining back from water, what are we exchanging it for, and what are we giving? Like that's the premise that we are trying to see if it's worth to base it on, to prioritize that one. The thing is, we have been doing that. We have been doing that for so long, and it does, what we've learned is just basic analysis of the data that we have, is that we cannot prioritize that value because the price of water does not reflect the whole range of benefits that we get from interacting with it, from extracting it, from using it, and exchanging it. So it is a limited tool, the fact that we prioritize that and not the other ones that create the basis to have this economic value, then the system collapses. So I will argue that itself, prioritizing it, creates all these vacuums in governance that we discussed before, because it doesn't allow us to see the real holistic value of water. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you. So you can fight if you like. So I'd like you all to think about preparing your statements, whilst Diego now has an opportunity to also contribute.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say something. Let's clarify a couple of issues that I think our opponents are a bit confused. The case of the tariffs, Cape Town, right? Let's be clear about one thing. Tariffs, in most cases around the world, they are not designed on economic principles. They are designed on financial principles, which is very different. Tariffs in most countries do not pay for the water. They pay for the service to send the water around, right? So we are not valuing the resource. In a proper tariff setting with economic principles, you will have a scarcity value embedded in the tariff that would include the externalities. And at the same time, you will have instruments such as subsidies, which is an economic instrument. And you see countries like Chile having one of the best subsidy programs in the world to provide for that social aspect as well. So we are confusing finance with economics, right? What you're referring to, economic value, it's a financial aspect, not an economic one.
Oh, there you go. Right, so I think because we started in one order and worked along the row, maybe our closing statement should go back the other way. So maybe, James, you could give the first, and then I will reverse the order in which we had the first statements. Okay, so maybe we'll go James, Diego, Sophia, Juanita, Elisa, Tova. Okay? These are your closing statements. So if you want to compose yourself, concise, pithy, this is your opportunity. To an unswayed crowd. This is the quivering.
Well, it's a difficult one in terms of I keep looking at the statement. And what we must do is access the value that water brings to society. And only through valuing that can we generate the returns, the investment returns that we're looking for through society, through companies, through different investors, to be able to invest in our freshwater systems. Because if we don't, we will continue to bleed them dry. And we will end up, 30 years from now, putting far more pressure on our younger generation and the generation behind them yet to come to solve those problems. Never mind the carbon problem that we'll have at the same time. That's all I've got to say. I cannot believe that there is not much more rousing rabble from the audience over this critical topic.
Thank you, James. Diego.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so I think we explained it very clearly on the issues of valuation and what is important. No? We are valuing the resource, we are incorporating negative externalities, so we're trying to correct market failures. We have instruments in addition to that could be very well used, such as economic regulation. Right? So we heard, like Karen was saying, no, the economic tool is not an end in itself. It's a mean to accomplish certain objectives. So if we discuss, for example, what you were saying, no, my colleague from Forest Trends, that economic analysis is giving you the information and the tools to assess whether that program or project to comply with SDG 6 is economic efficient or not. If it's not, then you have to think of alternative designs. It's an alternative program, but that's because you had the information based on economic principles to understand that program. If your program is on resilience and not so much on economic efficiency, you can use variables that are embedded in resilience and use the same economic principles, which is what we are doing now in most of our programs. So it's fundamental, the economics and how the valuation is embedded into the economic analysis. Thank you.
Are you swayed after those first two? I saw a few nods and then I saw a few heads shaking. So maybe you're still undecided. This is your opportunity. So we've got Sophia.
Well, I would actually dispute about that if there is a confusion between the economic and the financial value of water. I would say that is the point we are trying to make. It's limited, it's insufficient, it's not possible to do it only that way and prioritize investment in that way. We have the crisis. I don't need to tell you the numbers, as James said, we know them. There is a crisis, so if we continue to do this, what we're going to find is a more unequal world and a higher water crisis, and what we need to have is the valorization of the valuation from other values, other intrinsic ways of understanding water that are not reflected in this way of prioritizing the economic value for the investment.
Thank you. We now have Juanita.
Okay.
Don't get too aggressive.
So we know that the states are inefficient on how we are managing our water, and we need a common framework where we can manage the water. Spirituality and other kind of beliefs are very subjective, and it's going to be very difficult to put commonalities on how we're going to manage this water. So we need a common framework. Capitalism, as we know it nowadays, is not the only economic system. We can develop a better economic system for sure, a more efficient one, but our common framework, an objective framework, will be the economy.
Thank you. I think I'm pretty undecided at the moment. I'm not sure where my vote's going, and I didn't even have a vote. So, Elisa.
So what I've been hearing for the last hour is that a lot of people think that the environmental, public, social value is somehow included in the economic value that we give to water. But I would like to argue for my final statement is that it's hard, all of these things are hard to number. How can you put a quantifiable value on culture, on social value of water? Some things are quantifiable, yes, but a lot of things aren't. And if these things were truly well encapsulated in the economic value of water, then we wouldn't be in the situation we are today. Because obviously, this is what we have been doing for decades, and it is not working. And that's why we need to think of something else.
Wow. It's getting there. We have one more statement to come back. So Tove, the final word before we vote, I think.
Bad governance, bad management of our resources does not have to do with economic valuation of the resources. Just because we have had a functioning economic system that hasn't worked well with our natural resources doesn't mean that it's something wrong with valuing water from an economic perspective in itself. Let us not lose time with trying to find alternative models when we already know how we can communicate and how we can attract those finances, those investments that we need to save us from this water crisis. We simply don't have time to do fuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Tove. And can we just have a round of applause for everyone, because it's really tough to do this. Is it on? Is it? Right, the digital counting system's on. So this time, we're going to reverse the way we vote. I'd like you just to see whether against the motion, who are those in favour, who are those who are supporting the arguments against the motion? Can you put your hands up if you're... Well, it's a debate.
Better arguments.
You can vote on the argument and the debate. So hands up. Hands up. Hang on. Hang on. Hang on. It's coming through now. Okay. Now, can you put your hands down? And just as our cross-check, could we just have the hands up for the those in favour of the motion? Yeah, it's digital. It does it. It's digital. It's 3-dimension. Actually, I think that.
Do you want the results?
Yes, Louise.
The absolute results, the against won, but on the sway, the for won the debate.
So, did everybody get that? So on the absolute results, the against won, but in terms of swaying and moving the discussion, the for the motion won. I think what's really important is not which side that you're on, that we're starting to think about this because it's really complicated, and the more that people have tried to explain the different sides of the case, it's clear that these are really important issues for us all. So I think it's important now that Isabel's going to give us a summary, independent, objective summary of what she's seen and what coming out of this debate. So Isabel, over to you. I've got a microphone if you'd like. Would you like to come up here? Oh, I can't get back up. There you go. Thanks, Isabel.
All right, thank you everyone, and thank you for the panelists. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Isabel Alvarez. I'm a program officer and colleague of Juanita and Tove at CIWI. So thank you to all of our panelists for this delivering such compelling arguments for and against a motion. I'm gonna make a brief summary, but first we're gonna read again what we were discussing today. So what we are discussing, again, this House believes that investment in water should be prioritized on its economic value and not on its environmental and public or social value, all right? So we had on the one side of the for motion, we had Tove, we had Juanita and Diego, who argued that we operate in a world and a system that are guided by economic incentives, so we need to be realistic. There's always a strong call for financing and the realization that the money from foreign aid is not enough. We need to understand the role and nature of the private sector. We need a clear price mechanisms. We need regulation in the sector. We need an informed market that is guided by the current and future risks that will provide actually companies and overall society with better guidelines and better behavior. We need to think of our end goal to attract more funding to the sector because water has an intrinsic value, but it's also a limited resource, and with an economic approach, we can regulate its use and protect it. And like this, the team said a lot of times, I heard, we are losing time in these debates, we need to act. Water is one of the most underfinanced sector. Juanita mentioned this, the water sector is severely underfinanced. And you mentioned that water is not free, it has a cost. You mentioned that there is a cost, there's tariffs implemented, and that we need to increase, we forgot about these aspects, we need to increase transparency and accountability on water consumption and also pollution. We need to promote water stewardship. Better economy actually brings a more prosperous world. And I think Diego mentioned that we are actually confusing terms. We're confusing terms in the financial and economic aspects. So we need to be careful about that, since tariffs actually can include economic elements, such as what the other team mentioned, subsidies that can actually incorporate some of the social aspects and values of water. And it's not how we value the resource, finally, it's actually our weak governments. And it's really interesting because at CIWI we work with water governance, and you mentioned this, I found this really interesting. We need to work on better governance in the sector. And then we had our other team. We had Elisa, Sophia, and James that were arguing against the motion. They don't believe that it should be prioritized only on its economic value. Elisa mentioned that there are still billions of people in the world that are suffering water stress. The current system is not working. We have a climate and nature emergency. That I think it was Sophia who mentioned that prioritizing the economic value of water in history coincides with this rapid acceleration of the current water prices. So basically, this mentality has brought us in the problem that we are currently. And it has come to the expense of the environment, the social well-being, especially, and we tend to forget this, especially of the most vulnerable and marginalized societies. Also, I think James mentioned that there's we need to combine the value of nature and ecosystem services, that they need to be understood as the same unit to make more rational and measured decisions for the business survival in itself of companies. So there's also the need to invest in the natural system that all of us rely upon, that these economic tools that we were mentioning on the other team that are actually inefficient, they do not value the overall value of water and the social, spiritual, and cultural value. I think that it was Elisa who mentioned that. And that we need to also remember that integrated water resources management, they believe in 3 principles: the economic return, equity, and environmental functions. And these 2 actually have been degraded in the past times. So yeah, I just want to add the last things, that there is no replacement for water, that if we continue to prioritize water investments solely on its economic value, our natural system will collapse. So that's that. Thank you to all of our panelists. There was truly interesting insights in one of the most important topics in the last decades in the future, which is the value of water. I'd like to thank also all of the participants, and I hope you enjoy the rest of World Water Week 2022.
Thanks very much. So we'll bring the debate to a close. Thanks everybody for taking part. It's really important that you do, and that you feel that you have a voice here at Stockholm, and we look forward to next year's debate, and I hope you'll all be there. Thank you.